X-Men 97 was one of the most hotly anticipated shows of 2024, a gift to kids who grew up watching the iconic 1992 animated series. I thought it looked good, and I was certainly intrigued and cautiously optimistic. But I don't think even the most hopeful among us were prepared for just how utterly fantastic the show is. As a lifelong X-Men fan, it's everything I could have asked for. Between this and the culmination of the best 5-year stretch in the comics in decades, X-lovers are eating very well, to use the parlance of the day. I love X-Men, and more than that, I love loving X-Men. But it also has me wondering about that dang ol' X-Men merging with the MCU thing. Live action has a lot to live up to, but I think X-Men 97 has provided the MCU with several guideposts for how and how not to make a compelling mutant-focused series of movies. Because after this cartoon series, which hasn't even finished its first season at time of recording, we're going to expect a lot from the world's premier mutant movie franchise. Here are some ways the MCU can learn from X-Men 97. First and foremost, the MCU needs to take the X-Men seriously. This doesn't mean make it dark and gritty. A moratorium on things being dark and gritty, please.
And I will not go back. You cannot make me go back. I won't let you make me go back.
Unless it's a dark photo of Gritty the mascot. That works for me. By take it seriously, I mean meet the property on its own terms. Look, I was as excited as anyone else back in 2000 when the first live-action X-Men movie came out. How exciting to see Wolverine and Magneto and Storm on the big screen. That movie especially, but most of the rest of the franchise, always felt like it was apologizing for being a comic book movie. It was either a po-faced grimdark slog or, well, goofy crap. The MCU has a tendency, even in its best films, to include little winks to the audience that they secretly know comic book stuff is silly. As much as the emotion hits in some of them, they almost always contain moments of, well, that happened, or weird.
I'm sorry, what was your name again?
Dr. Otto Octavius.
Wait, no, seriously, what's your actual name?
Don't do that. This is a colorful, fantastical adventure, sure, but it's also an allegory for prejudice, persecution, and genocide. For the central conceit to work, and it must work in order to truly be successful, this cannot be a nonstop quip fest. Deadpool can wink, Mojo can wink, and Legion can wink. The end. X-Men 97 has thus far taken itself as seriously as if it were prestige HBO drama instead of an animated superhero show. That's so unbelievably refreshing. However, that does lead to the second point. The humor needs to be there, but character-driven rather than situational. Why do you think there's so much great comedy right now? Look around you. So far, X-Men 97 has been surprisingly funny, much more than the original 1992 series. And this humor comes from the characters. It's Morph being a jerk. It's Wolverine not realizing Jean Maddie is in labor and instead thinks it must be Apocalypse attacking. These are funny moments born out of a deep understanding of the characters. Again, it cannot be a non-stop quip factory, especially if you don't do it well. Remember when Storm says, "Do you know what happens when a toad is struck by lightning?" And then she has the worst punchline in history?
The same thing that happens to everything else.
God, who wrote that line? Okay, so the next one... Get this tissue out of my hand. Okay, so the next one is a very big one. The politics cannot be ambiguous. The metaphor of the X-Men has been applied to various persecuted groups throughout history, from Black Americans in the 60s and 70s to the LGBTQ community. And even back in the 1992 animated series, this was front and center. It's the entire thrust of the show. Mutants face a government wanting to catalog them and bigots trying to destroy them, all because of how they were born. Now, I have seen some recent takes where some far-right people read the mutants as the true master race, and this is gross and incorrect, so if that's you, go eat your own head. At any rate, X-Men 97 has been incredibly deliberate about facing the politics inherent to the property head-on. The Sentinel program is, was, and always has been a human-led initiative to round up mutants, or as we saw in episode 5, wipe them out when they receive too many rights. This is maybe what I'm most worried about from the MCU perspective. The politics of the Marvel Cinematic Universe have been, at best, conflicted. It's no secret that arguably the two worst live-action series, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier and Secret Invasion, have made refugees played by actors of color into terrorist villains. The explanation for this is supremely mealy-mouthed. It's not all refugees, it's only some bad ones who happen to be the only ones we see. This is, I think, why X-Men 97 has chose to adapt Magneto's turn from villain to anti-hero to hero from the comics. It uncomplicated the metaphor. The MCU series, in adapting some inherently difficult and morally gray stories, try to both sides the issue they raise so as not to alienate any particular section of the fan base. Let me say this one thing. Disney, please, alienate it. Dumbasses will dumbass regardless of if you cater to them. Recognize that you have a duty to the fans of this comic, many of whom look to them as heightened and empowered takes on their own plight. Now for some fun stuff. Make it horny! My God, how horny is X-Men 97? It's not just Wolverine being in love with Jean while she and Scott are together. Unrequited love, sure, fine. Let's talk about how much implied boning we've had. Rogue and Gambit, Rogue and Magneto, Wolverine and Morph in at least 3 different guises, Cyclops and Madeline Pryor having brain sex, maybe Storm and Forge. You think the rave on Genosha in X-Men 97 was just about dancing? This isn't just an invention of the series. The X-Men comics are chock-a-block with coupling. It's as much soap opera as it is political action series. Hell, in the Krakoa era, it's effectively confirmed that unless it's an established, committed, monogamous relationship, the mutants are just boning all the time. Early on, we even learned that Scott, Jean, and Logan live together on the moon and are in a for-real throuple, and sometimes Jean doesn't need to be there. It's in the comics. When every single day is life or death, why wouldn't they want to cut loose in a safe and accepting environment? Naturally, there's a limit to how much Marvel can depict in the MCU, but except for that one scene in Eternals, there has been a shocking lack of sex in those movies. Romance, sure, there's some of that.
You are very beautiful, Cersei.
But do these people not get down? When an animated series ostensibly for a younger audience is more risque than live action movies, you know there's a problem. I mentioned Cyclops a little bit ago. Let's dive into him a little bit more. The next thing the MCU needs to learn from X-Men 97 is that Cyclops fucking rules. If you've only seen the Fox movies, you'd be forgiven for thinking Cyclops was nothing more than a preppy douchebag who just licks Professor X's boots while getting in the way of Jean and Logan's romance. He's basically super-powered Ralph Bellamy, a reference for fans of movies from the 30s. This broke my Cyclops-loving heart. Those movies did him real dirty. Even the First Class era timeline makes him a charismaless punk. I love that the response for a lot of the early X-Men 97 episodes were, holy crap, Cyclops is awesome. Yes, he is awesome. He's a master strategist in the greater Marvel universe up there with Steve Rogers and even taking the edge most of the time. The only reason he comes across as a hard-ass rule follower is that he's so worried about getting team members killed that he's a helicopter parent. Cyclops also, as the series has already shown, is a supremely complicated individual. He's been a militant villain in certain comic stories and a stalwart hero in others. His devotion to his people often has him at odds with the Avengers, even if they're ultimately on the same side. He's also infamously bad with women. While devotion to one's partner is usually a good thing, Cyclops' Jean love borders on self-harm. X-Men 97 went there with the Goblin Queen storyline, but it's even messier in the comics. Originally, after Jean died as the Dark Phoenix, Scott slept around a little bit before meeting Madeline Pryor, a whole-ass person who just happened to bear an uncanny resemblance, pun intended, to his lost love. The two get married and have a child, Nathan. When Jean miraculously returns, Scott almost immediately dumps Maddie for her. Marriage and child be damned. It's only after that Maddie's true nature is revealed as a clone of Jean, who then makes a pact with literal demons to enact her revenge. It's wild. Scott also has an affair with Emma Frost, which Jean still brings up on occasion. He's not a perfect guy, but he's so much deeper than he's ever been in the movies. Now, the MCU is actually pretty good at this. Tony Stark, Stephen Strange, and Hank Pym have all had watered down but still their versions of their comic book faults. So I'm not entirely worried they can't do the same for Scott, but they have to commit to it. Oh, and while we're on the topic, optic blasts. For God's sakes, they're concussive, not corrosive. They're like an energy fist. They can't melt things, they don't sizzle, they batter rather than cut or slice. Optic blasts are not eye lightsabers. Thank you for subscribing to my newsletter. Which brings me to the next point. For all the grounded relationships and political allegory, the X-Men stories also need to go out there. Some of the best comic plots involve going to outer space and meeting space pirates, massive interstellar empires, and aliens of all sorts. Remember our buddy Cyclops? His father is Corsair, the leader of the spacefaring privateers, the Starjammers. Professor X's one true love is Empress Lilandra of the Shi'ar, which we've seen in the show. Alien insectoids the Brood are some of the most terrifying creatures in Marvel canon. Mojo! He's a big bad villain, but he runs an interdimensional cable company. And it's not just space, but time. Cable is Nathan Summers sent to the future who becomes a war-hardened freedom fighter in the never-ending war between mutants and everyone else in the entire universe. Some of the most beloved stories in the recent comics have been about horrifying possible futures in which the mutants lose and Earth is turned into a horrifying war zone as a result. The current run of comics see the mutants terraforming Mars and Mr. Sinister cloning himself multiple times so that one of them might become a dominion or a massive all-encompassing consciousness that is the universe itself. This shit is weird. X-Men is maybe the best superhero science fiction in the history of comics, and X-Men 97 has kept that tradition going. The MCU needs to keep this up. While sure, much of the Marvel Cinematic Universe is based on Earth, outside our own windows, franchises like Guardians of the Galaxy, Thor, and Doctor Strange have proven audiences are willing to go weirder places and see new things. Like the quantum realm! It doesn't need to happen immediately, but the X-Men MCU movies need to embrace that aspect to truly set themselves apart from the Fox ones. Which brings me to my final major point. Adapt beloved comic stories, but do the right ones. And by that I mean, do not do Days of Future Past, and do not do Dark Phoenix Saga. Days of Future Past already had a great adaptation as one of the better Fox-era movies. Trying to redo that will only force comparisons. Even if the MCU version supersedes it, all it will do is just show audiences something they've already seen. And Dark Phoenix. I know it would be tempting for Kevin Feige to want to do that storyline properly because X-Men The Last Stand and Dark Phoenix absolutely failed. But there's so much more to Jean Grey than her darkest moment, and there are so many more stories to tell that cover similar ground without going down that avenue for a third time. Really what makes the Dark Phoenix story so effective is that it comes after the Phoenix Saga, the cosmic epic that bestowed Jean with the Phoenix Force in the first place. After that, she had years as a powerful hero before turning to the dark side. X-Men 97 has the benefit of already having done both Future Past and Dark Phoenix in the earlier animated series, so they have to look to other stories. You could even argue 97 has adapted too many major comic arcs too quickly, doing Inferno, Life Death, Executioner's Song, and E is for Extinction by the halfway mark in Season 1. I would agree with that. Any one of those could have been a season-long or even multi-episode arc, and my hope would certainly be that the MCU takes its time a bit in developing these characters and ideas. But what this is proving is that audiences are excited by adaptations of things they've never seen, and that it doesn't have to be just the most famous to casual fans storylines. With E is for Extinction, it's even adapting stuff from after the 90s series ended. Just like James Gunn's DCU, if the MCU were to adapt stories from more recent writers like Grant Morrison, Brian Michael Bendis, and Jonathan Hickman, it'll guarantee the larger film-going audiences won't see anything coming. Naturally, us comic dorks will, but that's our burden to bear. While it isn't a one-to-one, my hope is the Marvel Cinematic Universe will see how much X-Men 97 is getting right, and more importantly, how positively the audience is responding to it as a license to try to go for broke in live action. And it's not like there isn't a precedent for it. Let us not forget, the Spider-Man live-action movies only went to the multiverse after the animated iteration garnered so much acclaim. If animation is the testing ground, I'll take it. X-Men 97 is giving fans a mixture of the familiar and the unfamiliar, using 90s nostalgia to tell complex and devastating stories with tons of action, style, and yes, horniness. Your move, MCU. Think you can do better? But tell us, what do you think? What lessons from X-Men 97 are you hoping the MCU takes? Do you have an ideal lineup or villain you hope to see first? And should everyone's hair be full of bounce and volume like it is in animation? Mine sure isn't. Let us know in the comments below, and for everything you need in the world of pop culture, keep it glued to Mojo Vision. I mean, Nerdist.com.